Thank you. Well, this is a wonderful place to have a family Easter. I really feel I'm with my family here, and I'm very happy to be here. My wife knows I'm with my family here. This is the family. People who are out here doing this. I wanted to come out and stand with Cindy Sheehan and Ann Wright and all the other people here who are got arrested before, but who have been doing this all along. As a matter of fact, looking at that DVD tonight, I was remembering, I had to remember what the date of that was. It reminds me why I wasn't out here for that very beginning. Normally, actually, I was invited to be at the Vets for Peace conference that Cindy was at just before she came out here. And the people who came, when she said, I think I'll go to the ranch, a lot of the people who accompanied her right in that beginning were people who were in our National Security Whistleblowers Coalition and people that I've known and admired now for some time, like Ann Wright and Camila Mejia and various others. And there's 100% sure that if I'd accepted that invitation to go to the Vets for Peace again, I would have come with it. It would have been automatic, and I would have had a wonderful time, as you can see from that DVD. It would have been, and I would have spent the summer there, I guess. And I was asked, why didn't that happen? And I know exactly. Cindy, what was it, August 5th that you came out? What day was it?
The 6th.
What? The 6th, Hiroshima Day. Well, the thing is that when I was invited for that, it was just for that period, first week in August, for the Vets for Peace. Now, it so happens our anniversary is August 8th. And this was our 35th anniversary, August 8th last year. So for about 30 of those years or so, or 20 of them after the Pentagon Papers trial was over, I'd never been with Patricia on our anniversary, August 8th, despite the fact there was another thing to celebrate. That was the day that Nixon resigned. But despite that, August 8th came between Hiroshima Day on the 6th and Nagasaki Day on the 9th, and I was always in jail during that period, so I never got to the anniversary. So on that particular year, and actually for a year or two before that, I was deferring to my family happily and turning down things like the Vets for Peace over that week so that I could spend the 35th anniversary with my wife. So I missed that. But I didn't miss in November. That's why I was happy to be out here with Thanksgiving with the family. And I've actually appreciated being accepted so much into this family because I know how bonding it is to have gone through. How many of you were here in August, actually, in September? So you know what I mean by family. And it's not so easy for somebody to come into that months later and be accepted. So I really enjoyed it. I came out to, oh, by the way, given the introduction, so I'll have to tell you something that's fun in our family now, this week, in this week's Newsweek. As you are aware, our president did what I did, 35 years ago. He gave classified documents, or had them given to the press. It's very good. Now, there's some funny aspects to it. I mean, I saw in the paper here just the other day, it's lying out here, that he said, well, how did he happen to do this? Well, he wanted, there was lies going on, he wanted to tell the truth to the people, which is, of course, I wanted to do, so I empathize with that. Except that what we now know is that when he gave that information in 2003, he knew that the classified information he was putting out was a lie. He was putting out the excerpts that indicated that that Saddam had sought uranium from Niger, and the aluminum tubes and all that, there were centrifuges. We know now, he knew then, we now know, that part of the NIE, the National Intelligence Estimate, was false, so that's what he was putting out. But in any case, he was putting out classified stuff, so if what I did was illegal, which is a question, what he did was illegal for the same reason. Actually, I would say, or my lawyers would have said, that it wasn't illegal at that time, and what he did wasn't illegal because we don't yet have an Official Secrets Act. And we're likely to have that if he gets his way, actually. But in any case, the news this week is, here's the headline in Newsweek. Let's see if you can see it.
Leaker in chief. Yeah.
The reason our family is happy about that is my wife never really liked me being known as the most famous leaker. She said it made me sound incontinent. I feel now, I'm really glad that the mantle has passed, sort of to the president. I feel like Miss America, former Miss America, sort of passing on for leaker in chief this title. And somebody today was, who was it? Who was saying, "Leaker of the free world." You could do all kinds of things with it. Well, the fact is that I came out to be arrested, and I expected tomorrow, and I expected to get arrested tomorrow. And what is the point of this, after all? For one thing, we were arrested earlier. Why do it again? My wife asked that question on the assumption that we were going to spend a lot of jail time, and this would double my jail time, which she wasn't keen on. But I explained to her what I said to some of you heard me say today at the steps. How many were not there today in the steps? Okay, that reassures me you haven't all heard this, what I mentioned this morning. To explain what this is, what we're doing, and why I'm doing it again, and why I think it does need to be done again. And that is, this president, among other things, he's not only waging an aggressive war in Iraq, and I'm afraid, and threatening, and I think planning, an aggressive war with equally or more disastrous effects in Iran. Even, in other words, a second war crime, a crime against the peace, with the possibility, more than a possibility, that he will actually use nuclear weapons. The first use of nuclear weapons, which the General Assembly of the UN has said over and over, is not only a crime against humanity, but the words are, but the gravest crime against humanity. And this is what, now Bush says, no, there's no such planning, this is wild speculation, what Cy Hirsch has said. So we have a choice between what the president assures, no such planning is going on, and Cy Hirsch's wild speculation. So that isn't too hard to choose when it comes to where to put your bets. And unfortunately, who to believe. And so it's a very, very serious situation. And I think there's a very, very serious need for whistleblowing of that, for the people who spoke to Cy Hirsch and told him that they believe the juggernaut is unstoppable now. And officers who said anonymously that this is so terrible that they are thinking of resigning, in protest, unusual thing and quite appropriate. But resigning isn't what is needed. Stopping this is what is needed. Resigning it is not enough. What they have to do, and I'm going to be saying this now on every possible occasion, what they have to do is to put out all of those plans, put them out, let the world see them, let the Republicans or Democrats who approve of them stand up and be counted and say we approve of them, but smoke out the people who know, like those officers, that this is a disaster and the worst crime that we've seen since Hiroshima, and in some respects even more dangerous. Hiroshima opened the door to the eventual, someday, destruction of the human species. This door, walking through this door of first use in a world where nuclear material is all over the world, where many, many countries, not just Iran, could be, Iran would take years to be a nuclear power. Japan could be a nuclear power within a week, and a superpower in a year. They have the material, they have the plans. Germany, the same. There are many other virtual nuclear powers. I think the start of this actual use of nuclear weapons on people again, for the first time in the nuclear age since Hiroshima, will start a race of other countries to become nuclear powers, because that would seem to be the only way they can prevent a nuclear attack by the US or a conventional attack. So I think the situation is very grave. When Cindy has been saying that, even aside from that issue, just looking at Iraq, that this is a time for civil disobedience, for massive civil disobedience, I totally agree with her. So I had to come out here and stand with her. Now, civil disobedience alone will not achieve these things. It's one action. It doesn't do the job by itself. It never has. But it is essential. We've seen that over and over again in movement after movement. And in Vietnam, it's one thing that has to be done. In particular because it tells the rest of the country this is a matter of conscience, a matter of morality, a matter of urgency, that people are willing to go to jail to warn their fellow countrymen on this. And it's a challenge then to others not to go to jail, but to do what they can to avert the continuation of the war, to stop the killing, and in this case, to avoid an attack on Iran that would be an absolute catastrophe, especially in particular because of the nuclear, but even without that, to do what they can. Now, back in 1971, 35 years ago this June, starting June 13th, the Pentagon Papers began to be published. On June 15th, my wife and I went underground, meaning where we hope not to be found by the FBI, went from house to house. People arranged for us night after night for 13 days, putting out more copies of the Pentagon Papers. So if each paper got enjoined, we gave it to another paper through others. I couldn't do that myself. Obviously, we had to have helpers doing that, young people basically. And none of them were ever questioned by the FBI because we all stayed off the phone, and that's kind of paralyzed the FBI in those days. It still does, you see. That's why the NSA was operating then. But we did get them out, and the reason I wanted to mention that was this. That was a time when all you had to say to somebody who was young, which somebody with long hair, generally, which is what young people had in those days, not now, young men as well as women. All you had to say was, we're doing something that might help shorten the war. It could be very dangerous for you, could lead to prison. Are you willing to help? To find an apartment that night to help us put these papers out, to talk to the newspapers and distribute them and all that. But just in the simplest way, just find a place for us to stay. We moved in. No one said no. All you had to do was say, all you had to do. That was a time then when people said, it might help, will you help? Yes, what can I do? Right away. Now, we don't have a movement to that extent right now. But what there were thousands and thousands of people, mostly young, but not all. In other words, an anti-war crowd would look different, from this. And we don't have the students now. We don't have the young people, partly because of the draft, but really mostly for other reasons. The students had come through an unusual near decade at that point of this, going against the House Un-American activities, the free speech movement, above all the civil rights movement that came out of that into the anti-war movement, and so it was a young movement. It's a really different evolution from the 90s and the 80s for young people. I think that's the main difference, not the draft. After all, at least half of the activists were women, and they weren't subject to the draft. So that wasn't the essence of it. We don't have that now, but we need something we had then. And that was, there were a lot of people who were doing everything they could non-violently and truthfully. Not by any means necessary, meaning lies and violence. There were a few people who used violence. That helped the government keep the war going, the weatherman and so forth. Without violence, they went to prison. They demonstrated, they did civil disobedience, they did this and that. They did everything they could, including lobbying and campaigning, and the electoral activity was essential, and as somebody said here earlier, I think it was Tom Swan, when I say civil disobedience isn't the whole thing, and demonstrations aren't the whole thing, it is essential to change the composition of the House to Democrats in this fall. Essential. And the Senate if possible. That has to happen. And not because the Democrats are our saviors. We have to have different Democrats than we've seen for the last 4 years. Hillary Clinton will not get us out of Iraq, and is very strong on Iran. As a matter of fact, it's just necessary, just as the civil disobedience and all that we're doing here is necessary. Now, what I recognize in people in this group, but especially with Cindy, is what I saw a year ago when Cindy came into all of our awareness, was somebody who was doing everything she could do, everything she could think of. And that was the right way. I'll mention one other thing. Going back 35 years and 37 years and 38 years, what people should have been doing, there was no higher priority in the country. There was nothing that had a higher priority than ending that war. And what people should have been doing was asking themselves, am I doing enough? Am I doing everything I can? What more could I do? Well, actually, there were thousands of people who were doing that. As I say, they were mostly young and some much older, like some of the older women who had been working on going all the way back to the women's struggle of the early in the century. So you had some very old people, relatively, as they seemed to me then. That's what I am now. But a lot of young people. What we need now, then, is the example, and we need the test of doing everything, the campaigning, the electoral activity, the lobbying, the letter writing, and the demonstrating, and the civil disobedience, and the creative speaking out, which of course Cindy practically invented as an action. This was an invention, a social invention. It was just marvelous. So finally, what is going on, say, in action just like tomorrow? Which, by the way, I don't think you've heard yet, but our lawyers surprised us a little by, very simply, they're doing wonderful pro bono work on this. And they said they actually, the guy who's mainly doing it for the ACLU, I don't know if he's here now, but he said actually he wasn't eager to have new people join it for the simple reason that 12 is as much as he can handle, and he's not anxious to have a lot more defendants on this particular case. So he's not anxious. One might have thought, naturally you'd want 100 or you'd want a lot of new people, but just more people for him to handle and pro bono, and he's not anxious to do that. But what are we doing? As some of you heard me say this morning, what I think there's two aspects to this. On the one hand, I think the reason that the president has put in his request, the White House request, these restrictions which we are violating, is because he really doesn't want to see any protesters, and the people around him don't want him to see or hear a protester. As we're told all the time, anybody who knows the situation, they say he lives in a bubble, and that he wants it that way, and the people around him want it that way, and we're kind of poking our fingers into that bubble, into that soap bubble, and we're saying there's people out here who don't say yes, sir. You need to hear people who don't say yes straight away, and that's not what he hears in general. So try to get through that. That's good. Why though are we facing these crazy charges to keep us away? Why are they taking such efforts? I think the real charge, as some of you heard me say this morning, is very well summed up by a French phrase, which we all ought to learn, which is from the pre-revolutionary French days, the monarchy, the great crime of lèse-majesté, which refers to disrespect, lack of deference to the monarch. And it's every monarchy or dictatorship, but a monarchy with divine right aspect, even more than a dictatorship, has this concept. In Polynesia, I remember reading from Michener's book, that the chief or king would be accompanied at all times by two huge guys with huge clubs. And if someone touched the chief, or their shadow fell on the chief's shadow, no matter who it was, cousin, son, friend, lover, whatever, instantly clubbed to death. Instantly, that was the symbolism, right down. Touch the king's shadow. And again, this mystique of the king, that's what's being preserved here, and that's what we are not showing deference. And we are not showing the proper respect for this person who thinks of himself as a king, essentially. And we have to let him know. And I'll close with this thought. You saw the slides up here of one thing that's going on, the torture. As illegal as the aggression, as unconstitutional, he is a man who regards himself beyond all law, which means, by the way, that he's not a constitutional monarch, he's not Queen Elizabeth, he's not even King George III, which is after Magna Carta. He's an absolute monarch. Nothing restrains him in wartime. And the war is forever, you know. Nothing restrains him. Congress can't restrain him. Laws, Constitution, UN Charter, you know, any of that, despite the fact that we signed it. Nothing restrains him. And a lot of Americans elected him for that reason. I have come to a dismaying awareness of a lot of my country persons here, who are okay to have a king when they're afraid. And they go along with that, and I think they elected him because they wanted a guy who would, quote, protect them, which is the opposite of what he's doing, without any restraint. They weren't sure that Kerry would torture people. They weren't sure that Kerry, if we got attacked by somebody, would kill some other people. Now, who they were doesn't matter so much. He might not kill anybody. He would ask things, or Gore would ask things like, gee, who did this? Or will it make things worse or better if I attack them? He would ask things like that. And like Hamlet, you know, he would think about it, and we might not bomb anybody in the end. And Bush you could count on. Bush you could count on that he would go kill some people and torture some people. Unfortunately, a lot of people go for that. I say that we will be told that the reason I'm here and are here are these regulations are an unconstitutional restriction of free speech. That is all they are meant for. The kind of speech that is above all necessary, calling these people to account, exposing their falsehoods, exposing their crimes. That's what free speech is in the Bill of Rights for, to protect that, and these regulations are against that. So he's not only committing war in the Middle East, he is warring on our Constitution, on our Bill of Rights, on our freedom.
Hear, hear!
And tomorrow, the 12 of us, or some of us, or whoever, are going to pursue this again, because it is important at every step when he makes that, when you have a chance to resist that, and say, we are exercising our free speech, and the free speech we're exercising is lèse-majesté, or seditious libel, because it is expressing shame and disgust and disrespect for what this president is doing. Disrespect for the Abu Ghraib, disrespect for the aggression, disrespect for the possibility of nuclear war, disrespect. We don't respect that, we are not part of it. That's what we're saying. And if this be treason, make the most of it.
Yeah.